Hello and welcome to this video in which I document the journey that was upgrading my ball python from the tiny glass terrarium she arrived in to a wooden terrarium almost twice as large. Being someone who despises DIY because I work full-time, so I don't really have the time and energy for it, and I live in a small apartment, so I don't really have the space to accumulate a bunch of equipment, I tried to make the process as easy as possible for myself. Well, unfortunately, this endeavor, like so many others, ended up a bit more complicated than anticipated. So here is the journey of the OSB terrarium assembly from start to finish. Okay, let us start from the beginning, which is the purchase of the new terrarium. Now, I didn't mention this before, but my ball python is 145 centimeters long, and the terrarium that she arrived in when I adopted her was a mere 90 centimeters in length. Now, this is obviously far too small for an adult ball python, contrary to what a lot of people on the internet seem to believe. So I knew I had to get a terrarium for her with enough space on the inside that she could move around freely. Therefore, I decided to get one that was at least 150 centimeters in length, as this would allow her to stretch out fully along one side. Now, finding a terrarium in that size is not easy. The main two options you have here in Europe tend to be glass or wood. And as a glass terrarium in that size is not only incredibly expensive, but also basically impossible to transport due to its weight and dimensions, I went for the wooden option, more specifically the oriented strand board or OSB version. Now, the advantages of an OSB terrarium are that it can easily be assembled by yourself. It's also lightweight and durable, and it's very good at retaining heat. You can also easily modify the wood by attaching things to it through screws, or you can drill in holes. Also, all panels except the front window are wooden, which gives the animal inside a higher sense of security because it will feel less exposed. However, the main downside of OSB terrariums is that they are ugly as hell. It literally looks like you broke into a warehouse, stole a crate, put it in your living room, and then stuck a reptile inside it. But since my snake couldn't care less about what her terrarium actually looks like, and functionality is more important than aesthetics, I decided to go for it anyways. So after quite a bit of research, I ended up finding a German terrarium maker that sold OSB terrariums in my required dimensions for around 150 euros, which, even when including the 30 euros delivery fee for delivery to France, where I live, was a lot cheaper than any of the OSB terrariums I could buy locally. I would have bought one secondhand, but unless you own like an SUV or a truck, it's virtually impossible to transport the thing. Now, as they say in academia, let us get into the materials and methods section. Here is footage from July in which I go over all the things I have amassed to then be able to construct and equip my terrarium. I do have some things already, such as hides and substrates, but the majority of the things for the new terrarium I did have to purchase along with the terrarium itself. So this gigantic cardboard box, actually there's two of them here, those are the boxes that contain the terrarium itself. Then the next thing that arrived are these terrarium backgrounds from a different company. It's actually the same kind of background that I used for the corn snake terrarium background, and it only costs 50 euros. It's very lightweight and easy to cut into shape and attach to the back of a terrarium wall. But at the same time, I mean, if you look at it closely enough, yes, you will see it is hideous, but for the background of a terrarium, it will actually give the terrarium a very nice aesthetic. So that's why I just dropped 50 euros on this background that I can cut to shape. Unfortunately, the maximum length of this is 120 centimeters, so I ordered two, and then I'll try and cut them in a way that I can hopefully stick them together and it won't be too noticeable. Next is this set of 4 wheels that I can attach to the base of my wooden terrarium. Then we have the UVB lamp. With Python, just like with the corn snake, I use a 6% UVB lamp from Arcadia. So this one I bought from the reptile store, which was incredibly expensive. This thing I bought secondhand from someone on what is essentially French Craigslist, who was getting rid of all their reptile supplies. So this one I got for cheap. So in the end it evens out. I still paid less than I would have for like a brand new set. And here we have another Arcadia product, which is the heat lamp cage, which costs 26 euros and is essentially just a metal cage. Inside that is something I also bought secondhand, which is a ceramic heat emitter by Terra. This literally cost me a £5. Editing me here, I have an important disclaimer to make regarding the ceramic heat emitter. At the time of filming, I thought the ceramic heat emitter was a good heat source, but after doing some research over the last few weeks, I came to the realization that it actually isn't. Therefore, I will aim to replace it with a deep heat projector in the current setup, and later I will possibly try to install a heat lamp. If you're interested, I put some links to videos in the description that go over different heating methods and why the heat emitted by a ceramic heat emitter is not that great. Unfortunately, the socket holding the ceramic heat emitter doesn't fit in the cage. I mean, it fits in the cage, but there's no way that it can kind of be hooked into the cage. So what I did is bought these wires from the hardware store, and then hopefully I can do something like what you see here, this configuration, to then put the lamp holder in and have the lamp be securely like hanging or suspended in the middle of this cage. So that's that. The third thing I bought secondhand is this extremely crinkly and obnoxiously noisy bag full of wooden terrarium decorations that I bought for like €3 a piece, which is a pretty good deal because usually if you try to buy these things at pet stores or online, they are incredibly overpriced and it's very hard to find pieces of cork or wood that are actually big enough for a python to hide in. Next we have this, which is a sealant that is water-based that I bought to seal the wooden base of the terrarium. Not the entire terrarium, but just the bottom part, to make sure that even when my snake knocks over a water bowl or the substrate is quite damp, I don't have to worry about mold or the wood getting all like soft. This one is definitely water-based and it has a high like safety ranking. So I assume, I'll double check before I actually apply it, but I assume that this should also be reptile safe. I also bought a brush, especially for the application, so I don't accidentally ruin my actual paint brushes for this. And then I also have silicone. And I bought a gun for €9 or something to be able to use the silicone that I now can't use because it's not the right silicone. So I'm going to go probably just order some online and make sure it's the 100% silicone. So yes, this concludes my purchases that I made. So now the next step will be to start assembling the actual terrarium and then see how I can apply the sealant, and then I can worry about the other components. The terrarium arrived in 2 packages, one containing the top and bottom panels along with the glass doors, and the other containing the side panels and some additional elements. Unfortunately, one of the glass panels arrived shattered. And so I ended up contacting the vendor again, and they were actually super nice and helpful about it, and they just sent me a second glass panel for free, no questions asked. So that was great, and it arrived around a week later. So the instruction manual said to start by attaching the 2 side panels to the base panel, and that's what I did. At this stage, I was actually able to fit myself into the terrarium. Landlords in Paris would say, only 800 euros a month. And then it is time for my first custom modification, which is to install the wheels onto the base. Also, a word of advice, be careful with the packaging and the metal clips. That there is my blood. I sacrificed my blood to this terrarium when I accidentally stepped on one of those awful metal staples in the packaging. And will you look at that? During the construction process, the python decided to join us. Apparently that day she wanted out of her terrarium to instead lie around in a bag of cork. The terrarium assembly continues by turning the terrarium right side up again and then attaching the front panel. Now, the last stage of the assembly process involves adding the top panel. But before you do that, I would recommend sorting out the interior of the terrarium first, because once that top panel is on, it will make everything 10 times more complicated. So the craziest thing she's done is get on this lamp from the top of the corn snake terrarium and then wrap herself round and slide down like a firefighter or a pole dancer. Anyways, I need to get her down now because I don't want her to do that again, but just to show what a crazy athlete this snake is. I decided to use a liquid sealant to waterproof the wood, as I think this is the most efficient and also aesthetic solution. I have seen a few tutorials online where people suggest sticking a plastic or rubber sheet to the base of the terrarium to prevent water from coming into contact with the wood. However, if that thing tears and a bit of water can get through the cracks, it will be stuck between the wooden base and the tarp with nowhere else to go, making this the perfect breeding ground for mold and other undesirable things. Some people also just don't apply any kind of waterproofing to their wooden terrariums, which, given the fact that the python's terrarium isn't an extremely high humidity environment, might be doable. However, I've seen enough terrariums on Craigslist to see that the unsealed ones will end up with weird stains that are kind of gross looking. Also, unsealed wood is basically impossible to clean. To apply the sealant to the base of my terrarium, I rolled it outside to my balcony and then I also let it dry there to avoid any potentially harmful fumes in my apartment. I used a tissue to wipe away any sealant that got onto the glass parts. The sealant was quite easy to apply, and according to the manufacturer, the time for a layer to dry should be 24 hours. But after 24 hours, my surface was still damp. So I waited another week instead. It might have taken longer in my case because I put on thick layers to get into all of the gaps on the rough surface. To check if the sealant was successfully applied at the end, I added some water to the surface and left it there for a few hours to see if it got soaked up by the wood or not, and when that finally didn't happen, I knew I could move on to the next stage, which was caulking the gaps. Caulking? Oh, wait a minute.
Caulking.
How about the American pronunciation?
Caulking.
Yeah, it's a no from me. English needs a spelling reform. Anyways, this stage is necessary if you don't want water and dirt falling into the gaps between the terrarium sides. Now, I consider myself a bit of a caulking expert after having to redo the nasty joints in my bathroom. So, here's my super special caulking technique. What you will need is a tube of silicone and a sealant gun, or a silicone tube with an integrated gun function, a glass of soapy water, and a human finger. Just a reminder, don't just buy any random silicone. A lot of silicones you can buy will contain things which are not reptile safe. Your safest bet is to buy pure silicone or aquarium grade silicone. Basically, what you do is you load your gun. Can my graphics tablet shut up, please? Thank you. Basically, what you do is you load your gun and then gently press down on the trigger to slowly release silicone as you drag it along the edge you want to seal. You can take your time and it doesn't need to look super neat at this stage. Next, you take your finger, dip it into the soapy water and then you run it along the joint to smooth it out. Re-soap the finger and continue until the joint is as smooth as you envisioned.
Nice!
I ended up caulking all sides of the terrarium except for the top, which wasn't on at this point. So, after this stage, we were able to move to the next one, which was to add the background. Okay, so the silicone has dried because it's been over 24 hours now. So I decided I'll start putting the background in. I just haphazardly stuck the two pieces in. I haven't glued them down yet just to see what it could look like. The snake is here, by the way. She's a bit traumatized because she had a run-in with the neighbor's cat. No one was harmed, but she is a bit more cautious now. She's not approaching the balcony window anymore. So they're 120 centimeters long, which means I will need to cut one of these things to have 30 centimeters that I can then add. And I need to find a way to combine them so that the transition between them is smooth and there's not going to be this clear cut. In the end, it was quite easy to seamlessly combine the two backgrounds. I then cut them to shape and tried to get rid of the excess plastic fuzz as much as possible by vacuuming the thing multiple times, with moderate success. After that, it was time to glue down the background using silicone. I didn't really know what I was doing at that stage, so I just ended up putting blobs of silicone all over the background before taking it and pressing it down onto the terrarium back. I was then finally able to put the biology textbooks I got as an undergraduate student to good use by using them to hold down the background while the silicone dried. Another 24 hours later, and I was finally at the stage where I was able to add the terrarium cover. Now, before screwing down the cover, there are a few things we need to take care of. Firstly, we need to attach all the fixtures for the devices that will be inside of the terrarium. In my case, these are the ceramic heat emitter and the UVB lamp. Secondly, I need to create some kind of gap or opening for the wiring of the two devices as well as my thermostat probe to be able to go into the terrarium. Now, this opening needs to be big enough for me to get the widest part of the plug through it to be able to replace devices. However, it also needs to be small enough so the snake cannot get out. Attaching the lamp and the ceramic heat emitter fixtures was quite straightforward, as I just had to screw them into the wood. To make it easier for myself, I used a hammer and a nail to make a small hole which I was able to use as an entry point for the screws. You can also pre-drill holes using a drill. Regarding the placement of the ceramic heat emitter, there wasn't too much information available online regarding snake enclosures, so I followed the recommendation for bearded dragons, which said to position the ceramic heat emitter approximately 1/3 in from the outer side. This would later turn out to be a mistake, so put a pin in this for now. Now, making the opening for the power cords was a bit more of a complicated undertaking. So this is my power tool. It's a Bosch, whatever. In German you call this a Schlagbohrhammer because it can hammer. We have the drill setting and the hammer setting. Obviously, I'm keeping it on this setting here. There's my drill bit. The drill bit in. And let's tighten it as much as possible. And then I'm gonna pull the trigger. Then it's gonna make a hole. Unfortunately, it's quite small. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna make a hole, and make a hole, and then make a hole, and I'm gonna file it down. I'm kind of nervous though. So let's have a coffee before drilling, shall we? Content warning for bad woodworking ahead. So after drilling the holes, I took a saw to the wood to widen the gaps somehow. And as you can see, I have zero woodworking skills. Things were looking pretty bad. However, it turns out a file and some sandpaper can really go a long way to turn things around. After screwing down the top of the terrarium, I decided it was time to make it less ugly. Remember when I said that one of the downsides of OSB terrariums was their ugliness? Well, it turns out that one of my relatives came up with an amazing suggestion to improve the aesthetics by sticking wallpaper on the outside. So I went to the hardware store and found some stick-on wallpaper and applied it. I used the scalpel to free the holes at the side of the terrarium. It looked a bit hideous at the beginning, but in the end I think it turned out quite alright. You need to get up really close and personal to this terrarium to be able to tell that the outside texture is actually fake. And then when that was out of the way, I was finally ready for what I thought would be one of the last stages of this entire process, which is the interior setup. At this point, I should probably mention that I had purchased a digital thermostat to be able to regulate the temperature of my ceramic heat emitter. Now, let me tell you, trying to order a digital thermostat at the end of 2021 was an extreme challenge. Apparently, the entire continent of Europe had run out of digital thermostats at that point. I tried French websites, I tried German websites, I tried Italian websites, I tried Irish websites, I tried UK websites. In the end, I was able to find a single British website that sold them. It's exactly what I wanted, with one small issue. Yes, that's right. Despite having lived in the UK for 4 years, I forgot that they use different plugs. Luckily, I had some leftover adapters that I used to get it to run successfully. I hope that setup doesn't represent a fire hazard, but at the time of recording, it has been running for a few months and my apartment has not burned down yet. Next, I prepared the terrarium decorations by baking them in the oven at around 100 degrees Celsius for around an hour to sterilize them and make sure that there's no pathogens. I then placed them into the terrarium along with some cocoa fiber to act as a substrate, as a sort of temporary setup. I was also finally able to add in the glass. With the lighting, heat source and thermostat up and running, it was now time to test if my setup allowed for the right parameters. If everything goes right, I would then be able to introduce the snake. Of course, as usual, things did not go as expected. Remember when I said to put a pin in the placement of the ceramic heat emitter? Well, my decision to place it 1/3 into the terrarium came back to bite me as it exuded way too much heat. I've run it with the thermostat for 1 or 2 days. This entire area is 30 to 32 degrees, and then on the far end it will only cool down to like 27.5, which is not really what I would consider a cold spot. I now have to take these screws, unscrew the damn thing, and then reattach it here. But unfortunately, I'm at a point where I already screwed down the top part of the terrarium and wallpapered over it, so I can't really remove it or attach it while it's upside down, which would make my life 1,000 times easier. So what we're going to do instead is somehow attempt to detach this thing and then screw it into the ceiling upside down with an enclosed space kind of around me, so it's gonna be a mess. I just wanted to show you this big brain, super genius idea I had, and shockingly enough, it's actually kind of working. So I am finally done. It was awful. It took way too long. I don't want to do this again. DIY, more like I don't ever want to do that again. It was terrible. So please learn from my mistakes. If you try to set up a heat source, make sure that you do not finalize things before you determine the right position. Anyways, now that that was out of the way and my terrarium was running at the correct temperatures for around 2 days, I decided it was finally time for the last stage, which was introducing the snake. While I would have loved to be able to say everything was finalized at this stage, unfortunately it wasn't the case. It took me a while to realize that while the surface temperatures in the terrarium seemed to be good, the temperature inside the warm hide was not sufficiently high, which led to strange basking behavior and a restless snake. Therefore, I decided to solve the problem by creating a double-decker hide so that the top hide was closer to the ceramic heat emitter. I did this by taking a plastic box to create a humid hide that I was meaning to install anyways, and then stack the hide on top. To stack the hides, I siliconed a plastic platform that I ordered from the hardware store onto the lid of the humid hide. I then used metal clips to attach the warm hide onto the platform. That way, I was able to remove the warm hide to clean it if necessary. I also added substrate into the hide for a more naturalistic bedding. And yes, the two hides are not exactly the most aesthetic things, but it's virtually impossible to find a naturalistic hide the right size for my snake that doesn't cost a fortune, and then these hides typically aren't stackable. At this stage, I also decided to drill a hole in the side of the warm hide to wedge the thermostat probe into it so I could control the ambient temperature more accurately. Along with the hides, I also added in some decoration that I bought from the hardware and garden stores in form of fake plants. As the snake is incredibly chunky, live plants would not last very long. While these plants make the terrarium more visually appealing to me, in the case of the large plant that you see in the center of the terrarium, it also provides shade and a place to hide behind. So there you have it. The terrarium is largely complete. At the time of editing this video, I have actually changed and added a few things, such as more climbing opportunities, as well as replacing the ceramic heat emitter with a different heat source, which I may document in a future stage, so stay tuned if that interests you. For now, I'm quite happy with my setup, and the snake really seems to enjoy it as well. She really likes to spend time in her humid hide, which is something she never had before. Over the last few months, she also appears to have calmed down a lot, and even when she decides to go out on a rampage in my apartment, she will often head back into her enclosure by herself, which is something she never did in the old setup. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's the longest one I've made so far, and hopefully it wasn't too boring. If you're the one human being that probably made it to the end, let me know in the comments and I'll give the comment a heart. Okay. Goodbye.